This video is going to contain spoilers for the game Hades. I don't know which ones because I'm writing the spoiler warning as the first part of the script, so just assume it's the parts you're going to most want not spoiled and act accordingly. You ever think about how games level you up? More specifically, you ever think about the different ways games level you up? Like, most games I've ever played just use an experience point system, where you do a thing and numbers go up. If the numbers go up enough, you can do the thing better. You might, if you're lucky, even get a new thing to do. And if that sounds like I'm being dismissive of XP systems, I don't mean to be. There's a reason XP systems get used so much. They're easy to make, easy to understand, in general. If you grew up playing RuneScape, you might have the weird neurological quirk where you think half of 99 is 92, but other than that, they're pretty good. That said, I do still have this fascination with games that defy XP systems. Stuff like Dishonored, where to grow stronger you can use the still beating heart of a dead woman to supernaturally locate occult charms made from the bones of whales that you can trade to the devil to gain the ability to double jump. If you're looking for something a little more chill instead, maybe I can sell you on Stardew Valley. Stardew does technically have skills you advance with experience from the classic do-a-thing school of thought, but anyone that's gotten deep into the game will tell you that the actual method of growth has way more to do with the game's gift-giving mechanic, and using your care for individual people to bring a community wounded by its own neglect back together again. And hey, speaking of giving offerings to occult beings and using a gift-giving mechanic to heal rifts in the people and world around you, let's talk about... Hades is a little bit of an indie game. You might not have heard of it. It's a roguelite made by the developers of Pyre, Transistor, and Bastion, all great games in their own rights that nonetheless all acted as building blocks for the overwhelming success of Hades. Just by review count alone, you can probably tell which one was their breakout game, especially when you consider that we've just had a Hades 2 announcement while I'm writing this script. Before we get in, let's cover our basis. This game is a roguelite, as opposed to a roguelike. Both of these terms come from the game Rogue, an older turn-based dungeon crawler game where you descend into the unknown, collect gear and loot, and lose it all when you die. In general terms, games that follow the roguelike category stick to this lose-it-all system, whereas roguelites have some method of permanent progression. This second one is the category that Hades falls into, and we'll get to the game's method in just a minute. Hades sees you playing as Zagreus, a young god of the Grecian underworld and the son of Nyx, a night deity, and the big man himself Hades. You know, the guy from the title, whom I will henceforth always refer to with some form of dad-based epitaph when I'm referring to the character as opposed to the name of the game. The main gameplay loop sees you fighting through increasingly difficult dungeon labyrinths and ever more vicious denizens of the underworld as you make a desperate dash to escape your father's halls. But hey, why are we ransacking our father's domain? Well, it's nothing more than the raw hatred you have for your father, an emotion that said father conveniently feels for us too. We are ungrateful, he's overbearing, we were late to work once, he fired us, we pet the dog too much, and he never let your mother know you didn't die after you were born. Oh, yeah, that's like the thing, by the way. You learn pretty early that your mother, Nyx, isn't actually your mother because your actual mother, Persephone, thought you died as a babe and fled the underworld. Naturally, you might have some questions, but Papa Hades is a real tight-lipped son of a bitch, and no one else in the house is willing to speak out behind his back. With no other options, we simply break for the surface. If Mom could do it, surely we can too. Well, it turns out to not be that simple. Fun fact, dead people just walking back into the realm of the living is apparently a real concern around here, so Senior Hades had a huge tricky puzzle basement installed full of monsters and the whatnot to prevent anyone from doing so. And even if you get past all of these monsters, there's...
Halt, Zagreus. Not one step further.
Megara's whole job is to beat the shit out of people, and guess what? She's really good at it. Which is a problem for us, but what isn't a problem is having our insides become our outsides, because we're still a god, duh. We just rematerialize in this nifty pool of blood right down the hall from our dad, which is neat because it gives us a chance to shit-talk him every time we bite the dust. It's a little petty, sure, but hey, so's lying to your son about who his mother is. Regardless, though, if we can't get past Megara, I guess that's that then. Ask Pops for the 9 to 5 back and spend eternity pushing a pencil? Wrong. Hades is a game obsessed with growth and surpassing your own limitations, so let's talk about how we do that. Now, despite her distance from them, Nyx still has the gods on Olympus on speed dial, and a quick call and one minor lie later, the gods are super invested in lending you a hand because they think you're trying to escape to join them. Every time you enter a room in Dad's tricky puzzle basement, you have a chance to be greeted with a boon, a small token of power and affection from your cousins on high. Now, any one of these alone can be a big deal in pushing further, but stacking up multiple can turn you into an absolute unit. If you don't find a boon, though, you might find these little things. They're called darkness, and you can spend them at this mirror, gifted to us by Nyx, to permanently increase a handful of your abilities, such as damage against enemies you haven't hit yet, your total amount of health, or the ability to persist beyond death a number of times. This is the thing, by the way, that makes Hades a roguelite, not a roguelike. You lose your boons on death, but the mirror is eternal. And while the mirror starts small, you can find the companion to darkness, called chthonic keys, occasionally spread out around the different chambers of the basement. These keys can expand the mirror's list of abilities, but you'll want to consider balancing the way you spend them, because they also unlock different weapons for you to use. Zagreus starts with his own sword, but there's 5 other weapons to try out, and finding the one you resonate with is a big deal. The growth doesn't just stop there, though, because boons and keys in Darkness Omai aren't the only things you can find. There's a whole slew of things, both temporary and permanent, that you'll want to grab during your escape runs. You have Palms of Power, the signature snack of the underworld, that come in both full-size and snack size, both of which Zagreus eats whole like he's one of those monsters from Sea of Thieves called a player character because he just doesn't have the 3 hours to spend peeling them. Then there are Centaur Hearts, which increase your maximum health by 25, as well as heal you for the amount increased, but this does come at the cost of being placed on a watch list for poaching endangered species. You've got Charon's Opals, a type of run-specific currency that's a little bit like crypto, because you can only really spend it at these literal underground markets, and it only takes one thing going wrong for it to lose all of its value, but it can be useful, so collect it and spend it when you can, because you're not taking it home with you after. There's Nectar, a hyper-delicious beverage that... you know what, we're gonna come back to Nectar. Though you can find some of Daedalus's hammers. Fun fact, it's actual canon that Daedalus made/is making all of the dungeon layers and rooms you fight through, and he occasionally just forgets a tool somewhere. Which kicks ass if you're us, because we can use these tools to seriously overclock our weapons. There's Gemstones, which unlike crypto is real money, and you can actually spend it on stuff, though stuff is mainly just making the House of Hades look nicer, in case you want to annoy your dad and also follow livable design aesthetics. Seriously, I know it's the House of the Dead, but it doesn't mean it has to look so sullen all the time. Finally, there's these special knickknacks you get as rewards for completing each of the floors for the first time, and these each have a few different uses that we'll cover throughout the video. The thing is, though, that all of these collectibles to make you stronger are just tools, and like all tools, they're only as good as you can make them. The main driving point of getting better at Hades is your own personal ability, and if you don't work to understand the enemies you face, the general vibe of each of the god's boons, if you don't get comfortable with your weapon, then none of the tools the game gives you actually matters. But if you pay attention, something cool happens. All of the repetition of the same rooms and enemies, of going a little bit further each time, it all eventually leads to this moment where you stop thinking with your brain and start thinking with your hands. Muscle memory totally takes over, and you start moving with decisions made faster than you're consciously aware of. And it works. Lots of times when I do an escape run, I can tell that I'm not actually the one in control. It's hours and hours of developed muscle memory with synapses all firing faster than they could if I was the one telling them what to do, rather than just trusting them to do their job. It's a really cool feeling. And so via a combination of increasing personal ability and the increasing efficacy of your permanent upgrades, you'll soon find yourself pushing further and further into the dungeons. Whereas Megara was once a brick wall of shame, it won't be long until she's just a rite of passage you've long since surpassed. That success, though, won't be flawless. You'll likely die a number of times before you pass Megara, and you'll definitely die a whole bunch more after you pass Megara. And this is when you start to realize that the gameplay loop of Hades also includes a failure loop. You see, there's an element to Hades I haven't talked about yet, and it's something that's relatively unique to Hades, at least in my limited exposure to the rogue-adjacent genres. This game has a story. Like, multiple stories. And they don't center around you exactly, but around the other characters in this game. And the way that these stories are told to us is a big deal because they only progress whenever we return to the house after a run. And they're not just shallow little one-liners about you or your activities, but full commentaries on how badly you hurt your friend Thanatos when you decided to just leave and not tell him. Megara isn't just a brick wall or a rite of passage, but a breathing person with very strong emotions about her job as a Fury, especially as it relates to you and your activities, because Papa Hades isn't kind to the Furies whenever they fail to stop you. Each failed run gives us the chance to speak with Nyx and try to better understand the things that have occurred in the past to bring us to this present. And it's not just exposition, it's dialogue written so incredibly well with characters that have so much emotion and life packed into them. It's incredible to me how quickly the sting of failure is washed away when I see that Achilles has had time to think since our last chat, or the rare moment when Thanatos is in the house and I have a few precious seconds to try and explain that I never intended to abandon him, I just need more in my life than what I can get here. And the game actively encourages you to engage in these talks via that thing called Nectar that I said we'd come back to. Nectar is a pretty neat thing that you can find in the basement because its purpose is twofold. Firstly, whenever we acquire a boon from one of the gods on high, we can give them nectar as an extra thanks. They'll extra thank us back by gifting us a keepsake, a little token of their favor, each of which has unique effects and can all help change up how your run through the dungeon goes. It's not just the gods, however. We can offer nectar to basically everyone we meet. We can give it to Nyx and thank her for all of the things she's done and provided for us. We can give them to Thanatos to say, please just listen, I'm sorry. And we can give them to our dad if we're interested in utterly wasting our time. And in return, each of these characters, most of these characters, will also grant us a keepsake. And while keepsakes are cool, and even passively grow and progress with us as we clear rooms in the dungeon, the best thing Nectar does is that it increases our affinity with these characters, growing our relationship and giving more and more depth to the dialogue pools that they have. The dialogue and relationship with and between these characters, and the way it also grows and evolves with us, is core to this game's success, because it doesn't just mirror the way we get stronger, but it turns that failure loop I talked about into progress. Every time you die in the maze, you learn a little bit more about your playstyle and the challenges you face, but that death also allows us to move further in the stories with the people we care about. There's so much we can learn about these characters and this world, and it's all done on the back of our failures and the masterful writing that has gone into this game. Do you remember when I talked about those knickknacks you can find in the dungeon? This stuff? Well, one of the things you can eventually do with it is pay the house contractor to open the door to our old job, the admin chamber. And while growing stronger and getting faster is great, for me, this is where the game really starts. The admin chamber is good for two things. First, we can witness the absolutely wallowing depths of Zagreus' abilities as a manager, whose raw mix of inattentiveness and genuine disregard for his post would give Michael Scott a run for his money. But more importantly, we get access to this cabinet. And within these folders and files, details. Oh my god, the details. Every run we've ever done broken down into beautiful, observable, quantifiable numbers. For every run we do, even ones done before you unlocked the chambers, we can see the number of the run, how far you got, how long it took you to get there, what weapon you used, which keepsakes you carried, what boons you took, all of it. And once you start stacking up escapes, because you do eventually do that, by the way, these papers will also tell you what you escape most with. Want to know the difference between Drunken Dash and Tidal Dash, which is better in your playstyle? Boom. Instant knowledge on which one you're most likely to succeed with. Want to challenge yourself? Use a whole collection of things you've never escaped with. Now get out there and show you're strong enough to escape with them anyways. And it doesn't even stop there. I mentioned briefly just now that we've started to escape. Why do we have to escape multiple times? Well, it turns out you're a god, yeah, but you're a god of the underworld. You have no power where you're trying to go, and eventually, no matter what you do or how tight you hold, the underworld will pull you back. Since Mom wasn't born of the underworld, she can leave. We, however, have no such fortunes. But we still have more questions than Persephone can answer in the time we have, so we simply escape again and again, and after our first escape, things get interesting.
The exit. That's a pact of punishment on it.
Boyo?
The Pact of Punishment is a system devised by Father Hades to make our runs more difficult. We choose certain things to hinder us, and if we succeed anyways, we're granted more of those special knickknacks that we can use to upgrade our weapons, or unlock special things with the house contractor. And while the pact system isn't required for continuing any of the stories, I think we'd be doing ourselves a disservice by not exploring it, because the pact system is a pretty key structure to how Hades invites you to grow in your own abilities. The pact system uses a measurement called heat. In essence, 1 debuff, or new effect, heat 1. 2 effects, heat 2. And once you beat a heat level for the first time, you no longer get rewards for that added amount of challenge. If you want more rewards, you have to push harder and get better. You don't get to casually romp through the basement anymore. Each run needs to become calculated. You really start to find your rhythm, like if Aphrodite's boons are worth trying out, or if you know that Best Girl Artemis is going to be what carries you through. Zagreus' starting sword is neat, sure, but once I get access to the spear and the bow, that blade is gonna start collecting dust. I can escape, that's not up for debate, but the pack system isn't here to talk, it's here to push. It wants to know if I can escape with only 9 minutes allowed per floor. Can I do it in only 7? Can I do it while monsters hit harder, or when they take less damage? If it makes the lava in Asphodel burn hotter, can I still trust my feet to carry me over it safely? I dunno, but let's find out. We've already come this far, and to keep the Grecian theme and borrow some words from Socrates, what a shame it would be to never see the things we're capable of. The thing is, though, that the pact system isn't the only big change I felt after the first escape, and when I finally met Persephone. There's this book, called The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. It's written from the perspective of a man named Patroclus and tells the tragic tale of his love for and with the famous Achilles. It's a painful read in one of the best ways, and is perhaps best known for these 2 or 3 sentences. I could recognize him by touch alone, by smell. I would know him blind by the way his breaths came and his feet struck the earth. I would know him in death, at the end of the world. The Song of Achilles is undeniably about love, tragic though it might be, and despite Patroclus and Achilles sharing a fundamentally different type of love than Zagreus and Persephone, it was still one of the first things I thought about after meeting her for the first time, because I don't really think it's a coincidence that the way that Persephone recognizes you, after first dismissing the horrid claim that you are her supposed-to-be-dead son, is by recognizing those burning feet. She literally knows you, in death, and at the end of your world, by the way your feet strike the earth. And this is when it came together for me that Hades is a game obsessed with growth, but it's way more obsessed with how it can use that growth to facilitate love. Love between a mother and her son, and between that son and the father he hates, who seemingly hates him back, though of course he doesn't. But what else is a man like Father Hades to do with secrets and sadness untold, other than turn it to anger aimed at those closest to him, those most vulnerable to his words? But Hades isn't just a game about a broken man and a broken family pulling themselves together. Long ago, a nymph named Eurydice was bitten by a snake, and perished from the venom. Her husband Orpheus, a famed musician, desperate for the return of his love and his muse, ventured deep into the underworld to reclaim her. After a moving musical performance to win the favor of Hades and Persephone, they were granted near-safe passage out of the underworld. Their success was at hand, but just as the Olympians think is your curse, Orpheus falters at the end, and Eurydice is lost to him forever. Now separated and alone, Orpheus is unable to play, struck with tragic grief at the loss of his inspiration, his love, and forever tormented by his own failures, all while Eurydice is only well because she stubbornly refuses to be anything else, and it's only through your growth that their own can be achieved. Via nectar collected from repeated escape attempts, you can help each of them broach the painful subject that is the other one, and slowly they come to find that there is still a deep love there. A realization only made possible by you and the efforts you put in as you learn to see how each of these people are not whole without the other. In the end, you can convince Nyx to tell you where Orpheus's binding contract to Papa Hades is, and you can use your own authority to decide he's bound by it no more. You don't have to aid these two, but I think you would be wrong not to. Likewise, we can find the aforementioned Achilles and Patroclus. Achilles resides within your father's house, offering service beyond death, while Patroclus can be found within the halls of Elysium, though he is unable to share in the joyous ruckus and revelry that his Elysium-bound companions feel. With time and care enough, they will each tell you one half of a story. How Achilles could have ended a war they both found themselves drug into, but didn't fight as he didn't believe in the cause, all while Patroclus sees the value in the war that Achilles doesn't. In a mixture of anger and self-righteous frustration, Patroclus dons his lover's armor and leads the men in the guise of Achilles, only to give his life in doing so. The joy of the enemy over slaying the mighty Achilles is short-lived, however, when the genuine article appears suddenly and is described to have entirely broken the enemy. While Achilles would perish from wounds sustained in doing so, he near single-handedly ends the war. Upon his death, however, Achilles is informed by Father Hades that Patroclus would not be bound for Elysium with him. Thusly, Achilles made a deal with Father Hades to offer his services to the house indefinitely if only Patroclus would be granted a pleasant life in the fields of Elysium. Though only later does Achilles learn through us the empty waste that Patroclus feels because any life spent without Achilles, even one spent in Elysium, can only have no value for him. When Achilles understands it's time to risk it all, he can't do so without you altering his contract, an act that is not done cheaply. But what good is wealth and success if you don't use it to bolster those who have helped you? Because the big thing to recognize about these duos, with one half of each stuck in the layers of the puzzle dungeon, is that they offer us aid in a way that is hard to quantify. Whenever we meet Eurydice, she offers us food, which is already pretty chill of her, except the food is magic and has the ability to significantly boost the effectiveness of the boons we have, or the boons we'll find shortly after her room. Likewise, Patroclus offers us 3 different items, each given in limitless supply to the heroes of Elysium that nonetheless he can't find any enjoyment in. These items, however, provide massive benefit to us, and while you're still solidifying competency with the final leg of your escape runs, these gifts are sometimes the deciding factor in whether an escape is a success or a failure. And like the gods on high, they simply give us these boons freely. And like the gods on high, it thusly feels like our duty to help them in return. Once, long ago, the world was ruled by the Titans. Was being the key word there because their children, who we now know as the Olympians, eventually overthrew them. With the Titans slain or locked away, their children were left to find meaning in the positions that were now left vacant. Someone has to be in charge of the sun, after all. And among these positions were the charge of the sky, the sea, and the dead, a trio of jobs conveniently taken by the trio of brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Father Hades. They drew lots, and Father Hades was assigned to the dead. While he will tell us that the rule of any of these three domains has its own unique shortcomings, it really does seem like Father Hades feels he drew the short stick with the dead, and when he leaves for the underworld, his departure was the birth of a rift that only grew larger when Persephone left in turn, and together they left behind voids that cannot be easily filled if they can be filled at all. The world above the House of Hades is stuck, trapped in an eternal winter, because the goddess Demeter brings cold with her sorrow over her lost daughter. Both Father Hades and some Olympians make reference to a war between mortal nations, and it's implied that the winter has been ongoing for a long, long time. Assumedly, around the same length of time that Zagreus has been alive for, and I would wager a strong guess that this war and this winter are connected in turn. What's more, the Olympians will occasionally comment on the waning relationship with Father Hades. They simply don't see him anymore, and he never seems to return any of the messages they send him. How much love, how much of a relationship can you have with a brother that only makes the choice to ignore you? Hades has a bit of a staggered ending formula. The first time you escape kind of feels like completing the game, and in a way you have. But if you want to see the credits roll and see Queen Persephone return home, you'll need to escape an additional 9 times. This is what's commonly referred to in the community as the true ending. That said, it probably won't surprise you to know that there's still more to come. Upon her return home, Persephone will begin constructing a plan to heal those aforementioned rifts left behind by her and her husband's departure from Olympus. Like all healing in this game, it largely falls to you to do the heavy lifting, and there's honestly a lot more lifting to do here than for either of the power couples we've aided before. Nonetheless, we can do it. So if we can't escape to Olympus, perhaps we can simply bring Olympus to us. And it works. It doesn't close those rifts entirely, nothing ever will, but it heals them. It grants understanding where there wasn't any before. And while the gods might not be happy to learn they've been deceived the entire time, they still can't help but sympathize. There's a connection between the House of Hades and the Olympians now, possibly for the first time ever. Maybe some semblance of love. Additionally, some of Demeter's dialogue after this implies that she's finally allowed winter to pass, letting spring and sun return to a once sullen world, though she keeps the snow in the final arena with Hades as a reminder of the things that have occurred. In this way, with the finally emerging spring, we can see that truly healing the family goes beyond the three of you to include the Olympians, and healing the Olympians includes healing the world. This video was a blast to make, even if I had to repeat way more runs than I'd originally planned on to get all of the footage I needed. Basically, the whole time I was recording this video, I was also obsessing over the incredible support that all my previous viewers gave my Cyberpunk 2077 video, and it pushed me to try and make this one even bigger and better. You'll have to let me know if that worked out. If you're new around here and want to support the channel, you can subscribe to catch more of my videos as they come out. And just like Zagreus is at his best with the support of his shade, I'm at my best thanks to the support from my funders on Patreon. If you'd like to see your name in the credits for these videos, get exclusive behind-the-scenes access to director's commentaries, as well as get early access to these essays, and more, then head on over to my Patreon page and see what tier works best for you.